You've probably seen the title of this video and are wondering, Mr. Gage, you've already done a video about your thoughts on the Brenner Era, why are you doing another one? Well, first off, that was my first ever review type video, so naturally it could have been a lot better. Secondly, due to more recent events, like Season 21 and the upcoming Big World Big Adventures film, I decided to revisit this topic and give my thoughts on it in much better detail. In my last Brenner video, I said I wasn't a fan of this era, mainly because it didn't connect with me as much as the classics, for several reasons. But now, I'm not too sure. Usually when I see a piece of media, or pretty much anything, I either like it or don't like it. But with the Brenner Era, it's hard to pick a side, as there's a lot of stuff I love, and other things I really hate. Keep in mind, this is what I think of these seasons. I'm not saying I'm right, you're wrong or whatever. Everybody sees things differently. And if your views on the Brenner Era and the future of this show are different from mine, then that's perfectly fine, and I will respect that. All I ask is that in return you respect my opinion. Also, I may do a bit of swearing in this video. I won't use any extreme words or anything, but I may say a couple of things, or use videos that have language that some viewers may not like, so viewer discretion is advised. With all that said, let's dive right into the Brenner Era of Thomas and Friends. Number 1. Yearly releases. To kick things off, I want to talk about a problem that's honestly actually been around long before the Brenner Era. The fact that Thomas and Friends is now a yearly release show. There has been one season every year since Season 6 in 2002 and one film every year since Hero of the Rails in 2009. Because of this, I feel there isn't as much time been spent on each season and film as there should be. So when people ask, do the animators check their work? I think a better question is, do they have the time to check their work? I feel this lack of time is very apparent in Journey Beyond Sodal. During its development, Art Productions, the previous animation company of the show, went bankrupt and was replaced by Jamfield. However, this change in hands resulted in a month of production being lost. Yet for some reason Mattel didn't change the release dates of the film. So I think it's safe to say that the animators had to rush in certain areas. It also didn't help that JBS is 10 minutes longer than the other Thomas films, and there's a lot more animation to do, like the bouncing engines and trucks. Long story short, there is much more to do, but less time to do it. If Mattel changed the date for JBS to come out in 2018 or something, you know, giving the animators and writers more time to work on it, then it would have probably turned out much better. Don't get me wrong, I do like Journey Beyond Sodal, but it could have been much better. Oh! Now I know what some of you are thinking, but Narrow, if that was the case then nothing would have come out in 2017. And yeah, that's true, but I would rather wait 2 or 3 years for something that would be nearly flawless and have little wrong with it, than just wait 1 year for something that might be good, but will no doubt leave a lot to be desired. This isn't always the case with yearly release shows or games, and sometimes things that have had more than 1 year being worked on them can still turn out bad. But I do feel it's a particular problem with the Brenner Era of Thomas and Friends. Number 2. The animation. Despite how I feel about the Brenner Era, there is something about it I really like. Something that's the only thing that has really evolved and improved over time. That is the animation. I know that may sound a little strange considering what I said a while ago, but while there's a tight schedule, the animators never seem to disappoint. Even Journey Beyond Sodal's animation, while simplified, is still pretty good. The facial expressions, the sparks in the steelworks, and the lightning effects during Thomas's escape. One aspect I really like is the improved lighting. I know that may not sound like a big deal to some people, but if there's one thing about the Miller Era I really hated was its lighting. The series in this era just looks so dull. Even in scenes where it's supposed to be a bright sunny day or whatever the narrator says, it still looks depressing. So I'm sure you can imagine that I was pleased when one of the first things ARC did was improve the lighting from Season 17 onwards. I also really like the designs of most of the characters, especially the new ones, like Merlin, Ryan, Frankie and many others. There are a couple I don't like, such as Duncan and the Express coaches, but there aren't enough to put me off. Yet more areas the animation is good is that it actually takes advantage of the show being CGI. Back in the Miller Era, I didn't hate CGI because it replaced the models. I hated it because it felt like Nitrogen wasn't doing much with it, and also because of the previously mentioned dull lighting. Most of the shots and camera angles that were in the Miller Era could have easily been done with live action models. Arc and Jamfield, however, fixes this issue by doing a lot of things that would be impossible to do with models, such as those long tracking shots in The Adventure Begins, or that long pan of Thomas crossing the viaduct in Journey Beyond Sodal. Overall, the animation is, in my opinion, the best part of the Brenner Era. Sure, there are some CGI errors here and there, some of which are so bloody ridiculous I wonder how no one at Mattel noticed them, but honestly I would say this is one of the few things about this era that's remained consistent. I do however grow a little concerned about how the animation will be used in the future. Number 3. The characters. Right, so I've talked about the best thing about this era, so let's move on to the weakest part. The characters. This is where my main issues with this era really begin.
This is just a series of things that are pissing me off, okay?
Now, I'm not talking about all of them, but I am referring to a majority. The main problem I find is the severe lack of any development or progression for any of the characters. There are however a few exceptions, like in Salty All at Sea, where Salty reveals that he's actually afraid of the sea. Then there's the Glyn 2-parter in season 20, that shows Stephen being jealous of Glyn, a side of this character we've never seen before. My point is that there is character development, but there just isn't really enough of it. I'm not saying every single character needs to be super in depth or whatever, as there are some characters that don't really need that, for now at least. I'm mostly referring to the older characters like the main 8, although I am referring to a couple of the newer ones. What I'm saying is that there needs to be more to some of these characters than what we've seen already. They do have their own personalities, and most of them are well written, but because there's no progression, nothing being added or taken away from them, then there's no real reason to get invested in them. Samson is a good example why lack of development is an issue. In 3 of the episodes he's the main character, he does the exact same thing. He makes a mistake and gets into trouble. Now, yes, all the mistakes and consequences are different from each other, but it's still the same plot, and it just feels lazy. Why not do something different, like, I don't know, a redemption story, or anything that doesn't involve Samson being an arsehole? Hey, anyone remember back in season 1 when James redeemed himself after the bootlace incident? Remember when Henry made up for hiding in the tunnel, or Thomas's and Gordon's alliance? Now, obviously in any TV show, you're gonna have a couple of filler episodes, and I'm fine with that, but there seems to be way too many of them between season 17 and 21. There are some episodes that aren't like this, such as the previously mentioned Glyn episodes, that cranky 2-parter that introduced Carly, and those episodes that involved James smashing up the sheds and Edward moving to Wellsworth. But as with character development, there just isn't enough of it. Now you could say, but Narrow, seasons 5 to 7 didn't have any big story arcs that had multiple episodes focused on them. Well, yes, that's true, however most episodes in those seasons, especially season 5, still felt like they actually mattered. And even if they didn't, they made up for that with their strong tones. We'll talk about that later. They also showed that most of the characters have changed since the first season. For example, Toby in the Flood and Put Upon Percy show that Percy has become more brave and mature. Back in the earlier seasons he was cheeky, careless and caused a lot of accidents. But season 5 shows he was no longer like that, but still had that young, childlike innocence. One thing that really pisses me off though, is that on occasion, the writers actually break previous development for the sake of certain episodes, which often creates continuity errors.
I weren't scared though. I weren't scared though. I weren't scared though. I weren't scared though.
Bullshit.
Let's look at Old Reliable Edward. I remember a lot of people loving this episode, simply because it starred Edward, a character that hasn't had much screen time at this point. And I would have too, if they didn't reuse the bloody Gordon is a prick to Edward trope. Or whatever it's called. Now this isn't the first time this has happened, but I was very disappointed to see Brenner make the same mistake.
You're so old and slow, I'm surprised Sir Topham Hatt keeps you on.
Fuck you, Gordon. You simple-minded prick.
This trope about the big engines insulting Edward should have ended after Edward's exploit, the episode where he proved himself and the other engines finally respect him. Yet for some godforsaken reason since season 6 it just kept coming back. Now it has been a while since that episode, so does that mean the writers aren't going to use this trope again? I don't know, but hopefully not. Out of all the characters in this series currently, there are 3 that I feel have suffered the most: Donald, Douglas and Oliver. Now, I already did a big rant on Oliver in my last review, so I don't really want to do it again, but holy crap, I hate the changes to his character. Now, I don't mind when characters change their personalities in a series, as long as there's some sort of transition and reason for why. But when there are neither of those things, the changes just come out of nowhere and make no sense. In Oliver's case, he starts off as someone who learns from his mistakes, takes crap from no one, and respects his break friend Toad. In the Brenner Era, he's boastful about his escape and arrogant to Toad, especially in Toad and the Whale.
I saw a whale on the beach at Bluff's Cove.
He imagined it, Thomas.
Why is he like this? I don't know. There's no explanation. It just happened. It's the same situation with the Scottish twins. They were hard-working, cared for each other, although lost their tempers a few times.
Oh, Kaya! Donald burst out.
Now they rarely agree on anything, argue and fight each other. Okay, but why? Why are they like this? Again, there's no reason. When I saw that Donald and Douglas were going to have another episode in season 21, I was hoping they would do something different this time. It sounded promising. They were going to be interacting with Emily, something we've never seen before. And I mean, it's not like they would use the same trope with the same characters, right?
You never listen to me. You always do what you want.
No true.
It is.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
You know, it's crap like this that really makes me want to hate the Brenner Era. Why on earth did they think reusing the same trope with the same characters was a good idea? Is it really that hard to accurately write these characters? Sure, Emily's crash is cool, and the animation is nice, but all of that is ruined by a plot we saw last season. What is it with them constantly using the twins hate each other trope? For Christ's sake, I'm sure it's just as old as the Thomas hates the new engine trope. Hey, you know how in the railcar and the coaches, Daisy, Annie and Clarabelle's relationship came from one line of dialogue? Well, remember in Escape when Douglas says he doesn't like the word scraps being said? Why not have an episode expanding on that little detail? Why doesn't he like the topic of scrap, whereas other engines like Oliver, who escaped like he did, seem to be okay with it? For me, that sounds a lot more interesting than what Love Me Tender and Emily in the Middle were about. I like the fact that all characters like Donald, Douglas and Oliver are back in the series, but honestly, if this is how they're going to be treated, it might have been better if they weren't. Now, not all of the characters are like this. Many of the newer ones are well written. I particularly like all of the Ulstead Castle characters, the Earl, Glyn, Millie and Stephen. Aside from the three I mentioned earlier, most of the other returnees are enjoyable to watch, especially Daisy. In fact, I'm pretty sure she has the most screen time out of all the other returnees, next to Bill and Ben. At least, screen time that doesn't feel like pointless fan service. Bradford and Hannah, while so far being one-off characters, are also a lot of fun, and are easily the highlights of their respected episodes. The introduction of the small railway engines in Lost Treasure was a real shocker, so were their adapted episodes in season 20, and holy crap, they even had the balls to bring Big Mickey from Tugs into the series. You know, regardless of all the flaws, it's hard to say there's nothing to like. However, the majority of the cast have so little to offer that even a few lines of dialogue from classic Thomas can top them.
I'd like to help, but these days it's only diesels that go there. Then Rusty decided, so that's where I'll go. Take care.
I mean, those few lines, from Rusty to the rescue, add so much to these characters. Douglas still fears what happens on the other railway, but Rusty is still willing to go there, despite what he might encounter. Are there any moments like that in the Brenner Era? There are a couple, like in Ryan and Daisy in that scene where Ryan is convinced to pull the mail van. The few lines establish that Ryan struggles to say no in these situations, and Daisy uses that to her advantage to do less work. But aside from that and a few other examples, I can't really think of anything else. Now, I do believe in the term quality over quantity, but that doesn't excuse the fact that there's very little to care about. And keep in mind, this is just the characters, I haven't got to the tones.